Chapter 3. He was not completely unconscious, however, all the time he was ill. He was in a feverish state, sometimes delirious, sometimes half-conscious. He remembered a great deal afterwards. Sometimes it seemed as though there were a number of people around him. They wanted to take him away somewhere. There was a great deal of squabbling and discussing about him. Then he would be alone in the room. They had all gone away, afraid of him, and only now and then opened the door a crack to look at him. They threatened him, plotted something together, laughed and mocked him. He remembered Nastasia often at his bedside. He distinguished another person, too, whom he seemed to know very well, though he could not remember who they were, and this upset him, even made him cry. Sometimes he imagined he had been lying there a month. At other times it all seemed part of the same day. But of that he had no recollection, and yet every minute he felt that he had forgotten something he ought to remember. He worried and tormented himself trying to remember, moaned, flew into a rage, or sank into awful, intolerable terror. Then he struggled to get up, would have run away, but someone always prevented him by force, and he sank back into impotence and forgetfulness. At last he returned to complete consciousness. It happened at 10 o'clock in the morning. On fine days the sun shone into the room at that hour, throwing a streak of light on the right wall in the corner near the door. Nastasia was standing beside him with another person, a complete stranger, who was looking at him very inquisitively. He was a young man with a beard, wearing a full, short-waisted coat, and looked like a messenger. The landlady was peeping in at the half-opened door. Raskolnikov sat up. "Who is this, Nastasia?" he asked, pointing to the young man. "He's himself again," she said. "He's himself," echoed the man. Concluding that he had returned to his senses, the landlady closed the door and disappeared. She was always shy and dreaded conversations or discussions. She was a woman of 40, not at all bad-looking, fat and buxom, with black eyes and eyebrows, good-natured from fatness and laziness, and absurdly bashful. "Who are you?" he went on, addressing the man. But at that moment the door was flung open, and, stooping a little, as he was so tall, Razumikin came in. "What a cabin it is!" he cried. "I am always knocking my head. You call this an apartment? So you are conscious, my friend. I've just heard the news from Pashenka." "He has just come to," said Nastasia. "Just come to," echoed the man again, with a smile. "And who are you?" Razumikin asked, suddenly addressing him. "My name is Vrazumikin, at your service, not Razumikin as I am always called, but Vrazumikin, a student and gentleman. And he is my friend. And who are you?" "I am the messenger from our office, from the merchant Shalopaev, and I've come on business." "Please sit down." Razumikin seated himself on the other side of the table. "It's a good thing you've come too, my friend," he went on to Raskolnikov. "For the last 4 days you have scarcely eaten or drunk anything. We had to give you tea in spoonfuls. I brought Zosimov to see you twice. You remember Zosimov? He examined you carefully and said at once it was nothing serious. Something seemed to have gone to your head. Some nervous nonsense, the result of bad feeding. He says you have not had enough beer and radish, but it's nothing much. It will pass and you will be all right. Zosimov is first rate. He is making a real name for himself. Come then, I won't keep you, he said, addressing the man again. Will you explain what you want? You must know, Rodia, this is the second time they have sent from the office. But it was another man last time, and I talked to him. Who was it who came before? That was the day before yesterday, I would venture, if you please, sir. That was Alexei Semyonovich. He is in our office, too. He was more intelligent than you, don't you think so? Yes, indeed, sir. He's weightier than I am. Fine. Go on. At your mother's request, through Afanasy Ivanovich Vakrushin, of whom I presume you have heard more than once, a gift has been sent to you from our office, the man began, addressing Raskolnikov. If you are in an intelligible condition, I've 35 rubles to give to you, as Semyon Semyonovich has received from Afanasy Ivanovich, at your mother's request, instructions to that effect, as on previous occasions. Do you know him, sir? Yes, I remember Vakrushin, Raskolnikov said dreamily. You hear that? He knows Vakrushin, cried Razumikin. He is in an intelligible condition. And I see you are an intelligent man, too. Well, it's always pleasant to hear words of wisdom. That's the gentleman Vakrushin, Afanasy Ivanovich. And at your mother's request, she has sent you a gift once before in the same manner through him. He did not refuse this time either, and sent instructions to Semyon Semyonovich some days since to hand you 35 rubles in the hope of better things to come. That hoping for better things to come is the best thing you've said, though your mother isn't bad either. Come on, then, what do you think? Is he fully conscious? That's all right, if he can just sign this little paper. He can scrawl his name. Have you got the book? Yes, here's the book. Give it to me. Here, Rodia, sit up. I'll hold you. Take the pen and scribble Raskolnikov for him. At the moment, my friend, money is sweeter to us than treacle. I don't want it, said Raskolnikov, pushing away the pen. Not want it? I won't sign it. How the devil can you do without signing it? I don't want the money. Don't want the money? Come on, that's nonsense. I'll be a witness to that. Don't worry, he's just on his travels again, but that's pretty common with him anyway. You are a man of judgment and will take him in hand. That is, more simply, take his hand and he will sign it. Here. But I can come another time. No, why should we trouble you? You are a man of judgment. Now, Rodia, don't keep your visitor. You can see that he's waiting. And he made ready to hold Raskolnikov's hand in earnest. Stop, I'll do it alone, said the latter, taking the pen and signing his name. The messenger took out the money and went away. Bravo! And now, brother, are you hungry? Yes, answered Raskolnikov. Is there any soup? Some of yesterday's, answered Nastasya, who was still standing there. With potatoes and rice in it? Yes. I know it by heart. Bring us soup and tea. I will. Raskolnikov observed all this with profound astonishment, and a dull, unreasoning terror. He made up his mind to keep quiet and see what would happen. "I don't think I'm feverish. I think it's all real," he pondered. In a couple of minutes, Nastasia returned with the soup and announced that the tea would soon be ready. With the soup, she brought 2 spoons, 2 plates, salt, pepper, mustard for the beef, and so on. The table was set as it had not been for a long time. The cloth was clean. "It would not be amiss, Nastasia, if Praskovya Pavlovna were to send us up a couple of bottles of beer. We could empty them." "You don't stop, do you?" muttered Nastasia, and she left to carry out his orders. Raskolnikov still gazed wildly with strained attention. Meanwhile, Razumikin sat down on the sofa beside him, as clumsily as a bear, put his left arm round Raskolnikov's head, although he was able to sit up, and with his right hand gave him a spoonful of soup, blowing on it so it would not burn him. But the soup was only just warm. Raskolnikov swallowed 1 spoonful greedily, then a second, then a third. But after giving him a few more spoonfuls of soup, Razumikin suddenly stopped and said that he must ask Zossimov whether he ought to have more. Nastasia came in with 2 bottles of beer. "And will you have tea?" "Yes." "Come on, Nastasia, bring some tea. Tea we can attempt without the faculty. But here is the beer." He moved back to his chair, pulled the soup and meat in front of him, and began eating as though he had not touched food for 3 days. "I must tell you, Rodya, I dine like this here every day now," he mumbled with his mouth full of beef. "And it's all Pashenka, your dear little landlady, who sees to that. She loves to do anything for me. I don't ask for it, but of course I don't object. And here's Nastasia with the tea. She's a quick girl. Nastasia, my dear, won't you have some beer?" "No way." "A cup of tea, then?" "A cup of tea, maybe." "Pour it out." "Stop, I'll pour it out myself. Sit down." He poured out 2 cups, left his dinner, and sat on the sofa again. As before, he put his left arm round the sick man's head, raised him up, and gave him tea in spoonfuls, again blowing each spoonful steadily and earnestly, as though this process was the principal and most effective means towards his friend's recovery. Raskolnikov said nothing and made no resistance, though he felt strong enough to sit up on the sofa without support, and could not only have held a cup or a spoon, but maybe even walked about. But in a moment of some strange, almost animal cunning, he dreamt up the idea of hiding his strength and lying low for a time, pretending, if necessary, that he was not yet in full possession of his faculties, and meanwhile listening to find out what was going on. Yet he could not overcome his sense of repugnance. After sipping a dozen spoonfuls of tea, he suddenly released his head, pushed the spoon away capriciously, and sank back on the pillow. There were actually real pillows under his head now, down pillows in clean cases. He observed that too and took note of it. "Pashenka must give us some raspberry jam today to make him some raspberry tea," said Razumikin, going back to his chair and attacking his soup and beer again. "And where is she going to get raspberries for you?" asked Nastasia, balancing a saucer on her 5 outspread fingers and sipping tea through a lump of sugar. "She'll get it at the store, my dear. You see, Rhodia, all sorts of things have been happening while you have been laid up. When you went off in that terrible way without leaving your address, I felt so angry that I resolved to find you and punish you. I set to work that very day. How I ran about making inquiries for you. This apartment of yours I had forgotten, though I never remembered it indeed, because I did not know it. And as for your old lodgings, I could only remember it was at the 5 Corners, Kharlamov's house. I kept trying to find that Kharlamov's house, and afterwards it turned out that it was not Kharlamov's, but Book's. How confusing sounds get sometimes. So I lost my temper, and I went on the off chance to the address bureau the next day. And just imagine, in 2 minutes they looked you up. Your name is down there." "My name?" "I should think so. And yet they couldn't find a General Kobelov while I was there. Well, it's a long story. But as soon as I did land on this place, I soon got to learn about all your affairs. All of them, my friend. I know everything. Nastasia here will tell you. I made the acquaintance of Nikodim Fomitch and Ilya Petrovitch, and the house porter and Mr. Zamatov, Alexander Grigorievich, the head clerk in the police office, and last but not least of Pashenka. Nastasia here knows." "He's got round her," Nastasia murmured, smiling slyly. "Why don't you put sugar in your tea, Nastasia Nikiforovna?" "You're a one," Nastasia cried suddenly, going off into a giggle. "I'm not Nikiforovna, I'm Petrovna," she added suddenly, recovering from her mirth. "I'll make a note of it. Well, my friend, to cut a long story short, I was going in for a real explosion here to uproot all the bad influences in the neighborhood, but Pashenka won the day. I had not expected to find her so headstrong. So, what do you think?" Raskolnikov did not speak, but he still kept his eyes fixed upon him, full of anxiety. "And all that could be wished indeed in every respect," Razumikin went on, not at all embarrassed by his silence. "You're so cunning!" Nastasia shrieked again. This conversation gave her unspeakable delight. "It's a pity, my friend, that you did not set to work in the right way at first. You ought to have approached her differently. She is, so to speak, a pretty inexplicable character. But we will talk about her character later. How could you let things come to such a pass that she gave up sending you your dinner? And that IOU? You must have been mad to sign an IOU. And that promise of marriage when her daughter, Natalia Yegorovna, was alive? I know all about it. But I see that's a delicate matter, and I am an idiot. Sorry. But talking of idiocy, do you know Praskovya Pavlovna is not nearly as idiotic as you would think at first sight?" "No," mumbled Raskolnikov, looking away, but feeling that it was better to keep up the conversation. "She isn't, is she?" cried Razumikin, delighted to get an answer out of him. "But she's not very clever either, eh? She's essentially an inexplicable character. I'm sometimes entirely at a loss, I assure you. She must be 40. She says she's 36, and of course she has every right to say so. But I swear I think highly of her intellectually, simply from the metaphysical point of view. There is a sort of symbolism between us, a sort of algebra or what not. I don't understand it. Well, that's all nonsense. Only seeing as you are not a student now, and have lost your lessons and your clothes, and that because of the young lady's death she has no need to treat you as a relation, she suddenly took fright. And as you hid in your den and dropped all your old relations with her, she planned to get rid of you. And she's been cherishing that design for a long time, but she was sorry to lose the IOU because you assured her yourself that your mother would pay. It was base of me to say that. My mother herself is almost a beggar, and I told a lie to keep my room and be fed, Raskolnikov said loudly and distinctly. Yes, you did very sensibly. But the worst of it is that at that point Mr. Chabarov turns up, a businessman. Pashenka would never have thought of doing anything on her own account. She is too retiring. But the businessman is by no means retiring. And first thing he puts the question, is there any hope of realizing the IOU? Answer, there is, because he has a mother who would save her Rodia with her 125 rubles pension if she has to starve herself, and a sister, too, who would go into slavery for his sake. That's what he was counting on. Why do you start? I know all the ins and outs of your affairs now, my friend. It's not for nothing that you were so open with Pashenka when you were her prospective son-in-law, and I say all this as a friend. But I tell you what it is, an honest and sensitive man is open, and a businessman listens and goes on eating you up. Well, then she gave the IOU as payment to this Chabarov, and without hesitation he made a formal demand for payment. When I heard of all this, I wanted to blow him up too, to clear my conscience. But by that time Pashenka and I were getting along beautifully, and I insisted on stopping the whole affair, telling him that you would pay. I went security for you, brother. Do you understand? We called Chabarov, flung him 10 rubles and got the IOU back from him, and here I have the honor of presenting it to you. She trusts your word now. Here, take it. You see I have torn it. Razumikin put the note on the table. Raskolnikov looked at him and turned to the wall without uttering a word. Even Razumikin felt a twinge. I see, my friend, he said a moment later, that I've been playing the fool again. I thought my chatter would keep you amused, and I think all I've done has made you angry. Was it you I didn't recognize when I was delirious? Raskolnikov asked, after a moment's pause, without turning his head. Yes, and you flew into a rage about it, especially when I brought Zametov one day. Zametov? The head clerk? What for? Raskolnikov turned round quickly and fixed his eyes on Razumikin. What's the matter with you? What are you upset about? He wanted to meet you because I talked to him a lot about you. How could I have found out so much except from him? He's wonderful, my friend. He's great. In his own way, of course. Now we are friends, see each other almost every day. I have just moved into this part of town. I've been with him to Louisa Ivanovna once or twice. Do you remember Louisa Ivanovna? Did I say anything when I was delirious? I'd say you did. You were beside yourself. What did I rave about? What next? What did you rave about? What people do rave about. Well, my friend, I can't waste time. I must do some work. He got up from the table and took up his cap. What did I rave about? How he keeps on! Are you afraid of having let out some secret? Don't worry yourself, you said nothing about a countess. But you said a lot about a bulldog, and about earrings and chains, and about Krastovsky Island and some porter, and Nicodim Fomitch and Ilya Petrovitch, the assistant superintendent. And another thing that was of special interest to you was your own sock. You whined, 'Give me my sock.' Zametov hunted all about your room for your socks, and with his own scented, ring-bedecked fingers he gave you the rag. And only then were you comforted, and for the next 24 hours you held the wretched thing in your hand. We cannot get it from you. It is most likely somewhere under your quilt at this moment. And then you asked so piteously for some fringe for your trousers. We tried to find out what sort of fringe, but we couldn't make it out. Now, business. Here are 35 roubles. I'll take 10 of them, and I shall give you an account of them in an hour or two. I will let Zosimov know at the same time, though we ought to have been here long ago. It's nearly 12. And you, Nastasya, look in pretty often while I am away, to see whether he wants a drink or anything else. And I will tell Pashenka what she needs to do myself. Goodbye." "He calls her Pashenka. He's a clever one," said Nastasya as he went out. Then she opened the door and stood listening, but could not resist running downstairs after him. She was very eager to hear what he would say to the landlady. She was evidently quite fascinated by Razumikin. No sooner had she left the room than the sick man flung off the bedclothes and leapt out of bed like a madman. With burning, twitching impatience, he had waited for them to be gone so that he might set to work. But to what work? Now, as though to spite him, it eluded him. "Good God, just tell me one thing. Do they know about it or not? What if they know and they're just pretending, mocking me while I'm laid up, and then they'll come in and tell me that they found out long ago and that they have only... But what should I do now? That's what I forgot. It's as if I did it on purpose. Forgot it all at once. I remembered a minute ago." He stood in the middle of the room and gazed in miserable bewilderment around him. He walked to the door, opened it, listened. But that was not what he wanted. Suddenly, as though recalling something, he rushed to the corner where there was a hole under the paper, began examining it, put his hand into the hole, fumbled. But that was not it. He went to the stove, opened it, and began rummaging in the ashes. The frayed edges of his trousers and the rags cut off from his pocket were lying there just as he had thrown them. No one had looked then. Then he remembered the sock which Razumikin had just been telling him about. Yes, there it lay on the sofa under the quilt, but it was so covered with dust and grime that Zametov could not have seen anything on it. Zametov! The police office! And why did they send for me? Where's the notice? I'm mixing it up. That was then. I looked at my sock then too, but now I've been ill. But what did Zametov come for? Why did Razumikin bring him? He muttered, helplessly sitting on the sofa again. What does it mean? Am I still delirious, or is it real? I believe it is real. I remember I must escape fast. Yes, I must escape. Yes, but where? And where are my clothes? I haven't got any boots. They've taken them away. They've hidden them, I understand. Here's my coat. They didn't take that. And here's money on the table, thank God. And here's the IOU. I'll take the money and go and rent another place to stay. They won't find me. Yes, but the address bureau? They'll find me. Razumikin will find me. Better escape altogether, far away, to America, and let them do their worst. And take the IOU. It'd be of use to me there. What else shall I take? They think I'm ill. They don't know that I can walk. I could see by their eyes that they know all about it. If only I could get downstairs. And what if they have put someone on guard there? Policeman. What's this tea? And here is some beer left. Half a bottle, cold. He snatched up the bottle, which still contained a glassful of beer, and gulped it down with relish, as though quenching a flame in his chest. But in a minute the beer had gone to his head, and a faint and even pleasant shiver ran down his spine. He lay down and pulled the quilt over him. His sick and incoherent thoughts grew more and more disconnected, and soon a light, pleasant drowsiness came upon him. With a sense of comfort he nestled his head in the pillow, wrapped more closely about him the soft, wadded quilt which had replaced the old ragged overcoat, sighed softly, and sank into a deep, sound, refreshing sleep. He woke up, hearing someone come in. He opened his eyes and saw Razumikin standing in the doorway, uncertain whether to come in or not. Raskolnikov sat up quickly on the sofa and gazed at him, as though trying to recall something. You were not asleep. Here I am. Nastasya, bring in the parcel, Razumikin shouted down the stairs. You shall have the account immediately. What time is it? Asked Raskolnikov, looking round uneasily. Yes, you had a fine sleep, my friend. It's almost evening. It will be 6 o'clock soon. You've slept more than 6 hours. My God, have I? And why not? It'll do you good. What's the hurry? Do you have a date? We've got all eternity before us. I've been waiting for the last 3 hours for you. I've been up twice and found you asleep. I called on Zosimov twice. He wasn't in. It doesn't matter, he'll turn up. And I've been out on my own business, too. You know I've been moving today, moving with my uncle. I have an uncle living with me now. But that's unimportant. Let's get down to business. Give me the parcel, Nastasya. We'll open it immediately. And how do you feel now, my friend? I am quite well. I am not ill. Razumikin, have you been here long? I tell you, I've been waiting for the last 3 hours. No, before. How do you mean? How long have you been coming here? I told you all about it this morning. Don't you remember? Raskolnikov pondered. The morning seemed like a dream to him. He could not remember alone, and looked inquiringly at Razumikin. Said the latter. He has forgotten. I suspected then that you were not quite yourself. Now you are better for your sleep. You really look much better, first-rate. Well, to business. Look here. He began untying the bundle, which evidently interested him. Believe me, my friend, this is something especially close to my heart. We've got to make a man of you. Let's start from the top. Do you see this cap? he said, taking out of the bundle a fairly good, though cheap and ordinary, cap. "Let me try it on." "In a moment, afterwards," said Raskolnikov, waving it off. "Come on, Rodya, don't oppose it. Afterwards will be too late, and I shan't sleep all night, because I guessed your size without measuring it." "Just right," he cried triumphantly, fitting it on. "Just your size. A proper head covering is the most important item of clothing, and a recommendation in its own way. Tolstyakov, a friend of mine, is always obliged to take off his pudding basin when he goes into any public place where other people wear their hats or caps. People think he does it out of slavish politeness, but it's simply because he's ashamed of his bird's nest. He gets embarrassed so easily. Look, Nastasya, here are 2 specimens of headgear. This Palmerston—" He took from the corner Raskolnikov's old battered hat, which for some unknown reason he called a Palmerston. "Or this jewel. Guess the price, Rodya." "Nastasya, what do you suppose I paid for it?" he said, turning to her, seeing that Raskolnikov did not speak. 20 kopecks, no more, I'd say," answered Nastasya. 20 kopecks, silly!" he cried, offended. "Why, nowadays it would cost you more than that. 80 kopecks. And even then only if it's been worn. And it's bought on condition that when it's worn out, they will give you another next year. I swear. Well, now let us pass to the United States of America, as they called them at school. I'm proud of these trousers, I can tell you." And he exhibited to Raskolnikov a pair of light summer trousers made of a grey woolen material. "No holes, no spots, and quite respectable, although a little worn. And a waistcoat to match, pretty fashionable at the moment. And when it's worn, it really improves. It gets softer, smoother. You see, Rodya, the way I see it, the great thing for getting on in the world is always to keep to the seasons. If you don't insist on having asparagus in January, you keep your money in your purse. And it's the same with this purchase. It's summer now, so I've been buying summer things. Warmer materials will be wanted for autumn, so you will have to throw these away in any case, especially as they will be done for by then due to their own lack of sturdiness, if not your higher standard of luxury. Come on, give them a price. What do you say? 2 rubles 25 kopecks. And remember the conditions. If you wear these out, you will have another suit for nothing. They only do business on that system at Fedyaev's. If you've bought a thing once, you're satisfied for life, and you'll never go there again of your own free will. Now for the boots. What do you say? You can see that they're a bit worn, but they'll last a couple of months because it's foreign work and foreign leather. The secretary of the English embassy sold them last week. He had only worn them 6 days, but he was very short of cash. Price? 1.5 rubles. A bargain? But maybe they won't fit, observed Nastasya. Won't fit? Just look! And he pulled out of his pocket Raskolnikov's old broken boot, stiffly coated with dry mud. I didn't go empty-handed. They took the size from this monster. We all did our best. And as for your linen, your landlady has seen to that. Here, to begin with, are 3 shirts made of hemp, but they've got a fashionable front. So, 80 kopecks for the cap, 2 rubles 25 kopecks for the suit. Together, that's 3 rubles 5 kopecks. 1.5 rubles for the boots. You see, they're pretty good. And that makes 4 rubles 55 kopecks. 5 rubles for the underclothes, they were bought in the lot. which makes exactly 9 rubles 55 kopecks. 45 kopecks change in coppers. Will you take it? Come on, Rodya, you've got a new set of clothes, because your overcoat will do, and it's even got a style of its own. That comes from getting your clothes from Sharmer's. As for your socks and other things, I'll leave them to you. We've got 25 rubles left. And as for Pashenka and paying for your lodging, don't you worry. I tell you she'll trust you for anything. And now, my friend, let me change your clothes. I'm sure you'll throw off your illness with your shirt. Let me be. I don't want to. Raskolnikov waved him off. He had listened with disgust to Razumikin's efforts to be playful about his purchases. Come, brother, don't tell me I've been trudging around for nothing, Razumikin insisted. Nastasya, don't be shy, help me. That's it. And in spite of Raskolnikov's resistance, he dressed him. The latter sank back on the pillows and for a minute or two said nothing. It will be a long time before I get rid of them, he thought. What money was all that bought with? He asked at last, gazing at the wall. Money? Your own, what the messenger brought from Vakrushin. Your mother sent it. Have you forgotten that too? I remember now, said Raskolnikov, after a long, sullen silence. Razumikin looked at him, frowning and uneasy. The door opened, and a tall, stout man, whose appearance seemed familiar to Raskolnikov, came in. Zosimov, at last! Cried Razumikin, delighted. Breaking in. The plot chronology, which has been progressing at a pretty steady rate until this point, has a sudden lurch forward during the opening paragraph of this chapter. Our protagonist has apparently spent 4 days in bed, and so 5 days have now passed since the murders. Hopefully it will be remembered from the letter of Part 1, Chapter 3, that Raskolnikov's mother had been planning on sending her son up to 35 rubles through her local merchant, borrowed against her pension. The sudden arrival of the clerk in this chapter stands in stark contrast to prior events, but shouldn't be a total surprise, nor should Raskolnikov's reluctance to accept the money. I take Razumikin's account of the backstory with the landlady and the IOU as authoritative. It seems that Praskovya Pavlovna is not antagonistic toward her lodger after all, in part due to the heroic interventions of his friend. The fact that Razumikin should call her Pashenka is of interest. That name is a diminutive of Praskovya, and its use indicates that Razumikin is treating her as a close, or perhaps subordinate, friend, despite being close to 2 decades her junior. What is less trustworthy is Razumikin's account of the police presence in Raskolnikov's room. Razumikin clearly has no suspicion of his friend, and he had independent reason to consult the police about him, since it was the police who could explain the legal history of his debt to the landlady. But might our police officials, especially the young and aspiring Zametov, have another motive to inspect the lodgings? The ambiguity here is an obvious reason for anxiety, as is the fact that Razumikin and Zametov are on close terms. There are other details in this chapter which may have symbolic significance, and to which I may return later. Of special interest to me is that Raskolnikov's first choice of a destination toward which to escape from the authorities is America. End of comments.